Few crimes have left an indelible mark on the psyche of a country as deeply as the Moors' murders. Between 1963 and 1965, psychopath Ian Brady and Myra Hindley abducted, tortured, and murdered 5 children, burying their bodies in the Saddleworth Moors northeast of Manchester, England. The depths of their evil shattered the innocence of an era.
There was obviously a severe impact on Manchester, that's where it happened, but the impact was right the way across the country. It was the fact that these helpless young children had been taken, which really wasn't a prevalent thing in England in the 50s and the 60s. That's what really was the impact.
The seeds of Brady's deviancy were sown at a young age. Initially known as Ian Stewart, he was born in 1938 into one of Scotland's most deprived neighborhoods in Glasgow. His mother, Margaret Stewart, was an unmarried waitress. His father, alleged to have been a local journalist, died before he was born. Brady grew up in and out of foster care and in and out of young offenders' facilities for burglaries. He relocated to Manchester to live with his mother, who had married Patrick Brady, providing the notorious killer with the surname he would become known by. Now in his 20s, Ian Brady secured a job with a chemicals company as a stores clerk. It was here where he met a young secretary called Myra Hindley. The couple began dating.
She came from a normal background. You know, sister was normal, mum and dad were normal, just a normal working class upbringing. And Brady turned her into another monster like him. Ian Brady had an absolute obsession with the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. And a lot of people have talked about doing it, but Brady had actually read Mein Kampf. And he read exclusively about what the Nazis did, about their racial profiling, the atrocities they committed. And he wanted someone he could actually talk to about this, who would have the same areas of interest. Now, with Myra Hindley, he found that person. But what he also wanted to do with Myra was turn her into the perfect Aryan girlfriend. So that's why she dyed all her hair blonde, so she could look like the perfect Aryan woman. And bit by bit by bit, Brady completely brainwashed and dominated this woman into doing whatever he wanted to do.
In the summer of 1963, Manchester was buzzing with the arrival of the Beatles and sporting euphoria. Their famous soccer team, United, had won their first major trophy since the tragic Munich air disaster 6 years earlier that had claimed so many of their young stars. But for the Reed family, that summer was the start of decades-long anguish. On July 12th, 16-year-old Pauline Reed donned a gold dress and blue coat. She was off to a disco later that evening. She left the family house in Gorton, and while walking to the venue, she passed Hindley, who she vaguely knew already.
A woman would actually go and find the victims, because you like to think the children are safe with women. I mean, she would go out and select the victims for Brady. Sometimes they go together in the car, but most of the time she would be on her own in the car and Brady would be following on a motorbike. And they'd just go driving around the streets looking for victims, driving around fun fairs, markets. But she was the bait. She would get the child or the victim in the car first. And she actively did that to support him.
With some time on her hands, Pauline Reed agreed to help Hindley look for a glove, apparently lost at the nearby Saddleworth Moors, and set off with Hindley in her car. Waiting for them was Ian Brady. Brady beat Pauline's head. Then he severed her throat with such force her spinal cord was slashed.
Brady was a sadistic paedophile, so he liked young kids. The oldest person he ever murdered was 17 years old, but apparently he was a very youthful looking 17-year-old. So he liked sort of young kids from 6 upwards, so 6 to about 14 or 15. So they were the sort of victims that Brady was looking for.
4 months later, on November 23rd, 12-year-old John Kilbride vanished. But his disappearance, coming the day after President John F. Kennedy's assassination, drew little attention. The following year, on June 16th, another 12-year-old boy, Keith Bennett, went missing. Then 6 months later, Leslie Ann Downey vanished from a fun fair the day after Christmas. In October 1965, Brady's arrogance finally put an end to their cold-blooded and carefully calculated crimes. The couple had lured 17-year-old Edward Evans back to their isolated cottage.
This turned out to be Brady's downfall because he thought he so controlled Myra that he thought he could exercise that control over her sister and the boyfriend.
The boyfriend was in fact Hindley's brother-in-law, David Smith. Brady and Hindley sought to implicate him in the next murder by making him watch as Brady used an axe on Evans.
When he'd finished killing this poor victim with an axe, he just looked at Myra and said, "That's the messiest one yet." And he said to the other two, "Well, don't just stand there, get some buckets of water, let's clean this up."
On Brady's command, Smith helped to clean up the bloody mess and carry Evans' body to the upstairs bedroom. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he left the cottage and reported what he had seen to the police.
The police went round there. Sure enough, the body was in the upstairs bedroom. That's the first the police ever knew about the killing rampage of these two. I can remember when I was doing my detective training early 70s, this was a brilliant investigation. I say that because all they had at the time was the dead body of a 17-year-old boy, and Brady said, "Oh, we had a fight and I had to kill him in self-defense." So we have one dead body and one allegation of murder and one of self-defense. They knew nothing at all about the connection of Brady and Hindley with these kiddies that had gone missing. So when they searched the house, they found a common prayer book. But up the back in the spine, they found a ticket to Manchester Central Railway Station Lost Property Office. So they went down there and they looked in there, and there was a suitcase there. And they opened the suitcase up, and in there was some photographs, the reel-to-reel tape. There was notebooks with like doodles on there. And from examination of that, they were able to then link these two with some of the missing children that had never been found up to that point.
Investigators also found photographs of Hindley and Brady on the moors. But these photographs hid a terrible truth.
With the photographs, all they had was Myra Hindley posing on the moors, Saddleworth Moor, which is close to where they lived, with her young puppy dog. Now, it looks quite an innocent photograph, but when you realise now, as we do, she was actually posing on the graves of the children. So they had to send a scenes of crime officer out with all these photographs and say, "Go and find the backdrop of Saddleworth Moor. We can home in on the spot where she is." And that's when they had to dig it all out, and they found one of the bodies. And then they thought, well, when was the photograph taken? They had to try and work out the age of the dog. They had to get expert veterinary advice in about the teeth of the dog, the age of the dog and everything. So that's the lengths they went to prove that the dog was there after the murder had happened.
As well as the photographs, police examined the tape and were shocked to discover its contents. It contained a recording of 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey that would haunt a nation.
It was awful. What catapulted this case into the consciousness of not only the UK but the world was the fact that on one of their killings they actually tape recorded it. They had the old 1960s reel-to-reel, and there was some music playing on this tape, and you could suddenly hear some screaming in the background. And it now turns out that that was a young girl being tortured by Brady and Hindley, because you can hear her voice on the tape as well, and subsequently murdering this poor kid and burying her up on the moor. So it's a 13-minute tape, but for the first time, technology can actually take you into the room where the murder happened. And this had never happened before in England, or probably indeed anywhere else in the world. So that really brought the whole horror of what they were doing home to people in their own homes. They are sadistic paedophile. The more pain the victim's in, the more pleasure they get. And that's what's so horrible about it. I've heard the beginning of that tape, but they've now stopped playing it. They used to play the tape at detective training schools, but it's so horrific, people were having nightmares, repetitive nightmares for years.
On October 7, 1965, Brady was arrested for murder. with Hindley's arrest coming a few days later. 5 months later, they stood trial for the murders of John Kilbride, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans.
Brady and Hindley never spoke about the child murders. They had a complete pact of silence at trial, other than the murder in the house that led to them being caught.
Their pact of silence would have an agonizing impact on the families of the victims.
There's an added horror to this case. Because they pleaded not guilty to the murder of Leslie Downey, the girl that they tape recorded when they killed, they had to play the tape at the trial, and they had to get Leslie's mother to identify her voice on that tape. So she's got to listen to her daughter being murdered because these two made that happen in court by pleading not guilty, because they had to put the victim with the offenders to prove the criminal case against them. So that is the most horrific thing, doubly, that any parent could ever be asked to go through.
On May 6, 1966, 28-year-old Ian Brady and 23-year-old Myra Hindley were found guilty of 3 counts of murder. Brady was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences. Hindley was handed down 2 concurrent life sentences.
Not only was the impact on the general public, all the gangsters inside hated him as well. They were just the most detested couple in England whilst they were alive. I mean, I had an incident when I was interviewing someone once who was in Albany Prison on the Isle of Wight in 1972. And he was there when a riot took place, and the prisoners took over the jail for a short period of time, and they actually took over the governor's office. And it happened so quickly, the phones were still in play, and they were ringing the newspapers in Fleet Street saying, "Oh, we're the prisoners, we just rioted." They broke open the governor's drinks cabinet, because they hadn't had drinks for years, and they were all knocking back the whiskey, the brandy. But there was also a confidential cabinet there with all their confidential records, and they ripped those out, and they were reading their own records. When somebody found Brady's file, because Brady was in the secure unit on the other side of the prison, and he saw the transcript from the snuff audio tape that had been taken. And he said to these guys, stop a minute, listen to this. And he said he started reading this out, and it went from a carnival atmosphere where everyone was cock-a-hoot to absolute dead silence. I had no idea the brutality of what they'd done to those children. And the guy I was interviewing said, if we could have broken into that unit that Brady was in, he said, we would have ripped him apart limb from limb and wouldn't have given a damn about the consequences.
After 17 years in prison, Brady was assessed with having a severe personality disorder and was transferred to a high-security psychiatric hospital in Liverpool. He railed against this move, insisting he was sane.
Brady was seriously mentally ill. He ended up in a mental institution. I wouldn't have asked Brady anything. He's mad. You wouldn't get a rational answer. It would go straight into that dark depth of his madness. Myra Hindley, if I had the opportunity, I would like to know, what was the tipping point? When did you go from being a girlfriend to being a compliant slave with this man? What was it that really triggered you over?
Though Brady and Hindley were behind bars, the parents of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett had to wait another 20 years before they learnt the awful fate of their missing children. In 1987, Brady and Hindley finally confessed to killing and burying Pauline and Keith amongst the Saddleworth moors. The question for the families and police investigators was where amongst the moors?
Not knowing where your loved one's buried just tears people. You can't imagine, as a parent like me, that ever happening. One of the common things with serial killers is to retain where a victim is buried is to retain power. So as long as they've got that power, they've got a reason to live on this earth. It's all about power and control. Now, 20 years afterwards, in the mid-80s, Myra Hindley wanted parole. She desperately wanted to get out. Brady, in fact, never asked for it. He never asked for parole at all. So she thought, I will surrender some of my control and try and con and convince people that I've turned over a new leaf. And she accompanied detectives back out to the moors where they went and located another body. But that's the only reason they never declared them. They just wanted to retain this control for when they could actually use it.
In 1987, Pauline's body was found, still wearing her gold dress. Pauline's family were at least able to give her a proper funeral. But for Keith Bennett's family, the torturous search continued. Police engaged geologists, archaeologists, and imagery experts in the effort to locate the young boy's body. His mother, Winnie Bennett, was relentless in her efforts to find him, making more than 1,000 trips to the moors.
Because neither of them ever came out of prison again, they never ever disclosed where poor Keith Bennett's body was, the one that's never been found.
Obsessed with control, Brady wanted to decide when he died. In 1999, he went on a hunger strike, demanding the right to end his life.
He wanted to die, he wanted to commit suicide, but obviously the prison authorities wouldn't let him. So he was force-fed for many years, and he only died very recently and lived, sadly, to the age of 79. It's almost wrong that he should have lived to that age.
With Myra Hindley's death in 2002 at age 60, the Bennett family urged the surviving Moors murderer to reveal the location of Keith's body. He never did. Ian Brady died in Ashworth Hospital in 2017, taking the secret of Keith Bennett's grave with him.
Manchester are just embarrassed by the fact that this happened on their doorstep, in their area, and I don't think they've ever recovered from it, frankly. Every time Brady and Hindley's brought up, people link it with Manchester, and unfortunately it's like linking Jack the Ripper with London. It will always be that way.
My mother was shot by Eric Edgar Cook. He was just a bad man.
The bullet went into my wrist there.
It's like swatting a fly to him.
In the early hours of January 27, 1963, Rowena Reeves and her date were shot by an unknown assailant while they enjoyed a car park tryst. It would be some time before the couple were to realize they had survived an encounter with one of Australia's most notorious serial killers.
My mother and her boyfriend were sitting in a car outside the Cottesloe Civic Centre. They were just having a drink there on a hot summer's night, and Eric Edgar Cook happened to be in the area, and he saw them there. And my mother looked across and saw somebody standing, you know, probably about 50, 60 metres away with a gun pointed at them. And she went, somebody with a gun there, and pushed him down, her boyfriend, and the bullet went through the back of his neck and into her arm.
He was standing about a little bit up from that there, not down there, but he went up to Netherlands Way and he shot several.
Eric Edgar Cook shot 5 people that hot summer night, killing 3 and turning the small city of Perth, Western Australia, on its head.
It had had such a traumatic effect on the whole community, the whole state, and the country to some extent.
This guy just went around places, knocked on doors, prowling around backyards in the middle of the night. It was hot weather, so people were sleeping on the back verandas. And he just murdered them cold-blooded.
Perth in 1963 was more like a large country town than the capital city of a state rich in natural resources. People were trusting. They slept with their windows open and left cars unlocked with the keys in the ignition.
You know, people would leave their back door open in case someone came around when they were out and wanted to make a cup of tea. I mean, that's what Perth was like in those days. I think it's something to do with the size and accessibility of Perth. I think we're a naive provincial town and we don't take enough care. Now, I'm not victim blaming. None of these people deserved what happened to them. Certainly none of them caused it to happen. But we're an open people, you know, and we welcome strangers and we take people at face value. Cook had this amazing technique of talking his way out of trouble. I mean, when you think of the hundreds of houses he invaded, it was inevitable he was going to get caught sometimes, and he did. He quite often got caught, He always had a story. I'm just visiting my auntie's place, or I live next door, I got drunk. Always had a plausible story. And people often let him go because of it.
Eric Edgar Cook was just 33 years old when he was convicted of the murder of 8 people. His crimes marked the end of innocence for an entire city. Cook's Australia Day rampage sparked a months-long investigation that would see detectives track down and test fire more than 60,000 rifles in an effort to match ballistics on the bullet extracted from Rowena Reeves' wrist. What police didn't know was that Cook was also responsible for several other murders and violent attacks.
He was on the loose for something near 4 years before he was actually captured, and nobody realised it was the same person. They really had absolutely no chance with Cook in the early days because, having been caught as a juvenile for burglary on his fingerprints, he then realised he needed to wear gloves. If anyone ever saw him, he would murder them so they couldn't actually facially recognise him. So it's very difficult to be tough on the police in Perth in the 1960s because he broke all the traditional rules and they weren't equipped to deal with that.
The eldest of 3 children, Cook was born with a hair lip and a cleft palate. Growing up, he often bore the unpredictable wrath of his alcoholic father.
Eric Cook had a shocking childhood. He suffered dreadful psychological and physical abuse at the hands of his father because he had a facial deformity, and his father hated him. He hated himself because of his facial deformity.
Eric Cook was an angry man. He'd been shunned at school, shunned in the workplace. He was known as a very shy man, but what happened was he built up this anger against the whole of the human race. And it culminated in him killing people purely and simply out of, in his mind, revenge for the way that he'd been put on this earth.
Cook was married and he had 7 children. He had many, many jobs. He kept getting sacked from jobs for stealing or for not turning up, or he had many, many accidents at work. He'd fall and hit his head, fall into a blacksmith's trough. Most amazing number of unfortunate events in his life. He said he used to black out a lot, and on one occasion he was just walking along the footpath in Murray Street in Perth, and he woke up in hospital. He had no memory at all. The last thing he remembered was just walking along.
Cook spent time in foster care and often escaped his unhappy home life by roaming the streets, which soon began to involve breaking and entering. He targeted Perth's affluent areas.
The western suburbs, where he committed most of his crimes, were wealthy. That's, the richer people of Perth were drawn to these suburbs, and so he knew that they were more likely to get cash and stuff to sell and booze. He used to like to have a drink while he was burgling it.
He also became known to police as a peeping Tom and a snowdropper, stealing ladies' underwear off clotheslines.
Eric Cook is an absolute classic of the genre. He would be a parody of a serial killer if we weren't talking about something so serious. He had every single marker. The average age where people start to become a serial killer is 27 and a half. He was 27 and a half when he first attacked a woman. He had psychological and physical abuse at home. He witnessed a lot of violence at home. He went on to become a housebreaker, a home invader. He was very, very practiced at that. He was highly intelligent. He suffered a whole series of shocking head injuries at work and at play. He set fires. He had sexual fantasies. You probably couldn't have got a more accurate picture of a serial killer.
Cook had twice served time in Fremantle Prison for theft. None of the law enforcement officers who came across him thought him capable of such heinous crimes.
Well, he was very smooth and friendly. He was almost obsequious to police. He always said what a great regard he had for the police and wished he could have been one, but he would say that that chance had gone because he had a bit of a criminal record.
He was effectively a petty thief, a burglar. He would come over and break into houses and take coins and money and small bits of valuable items. He went from being a burglar who committed literally hundreds of different burglaries into a killer. The hate in him somehow tipped over and he started killing people.
He had a sense of humour, that's for sure, and he had a wry way with words. He was highly intelligent, very, very smart fellow, as were his children. He's able to carry out his fantasies where possibly a less intelligent person wouldn't have been able to. So he had a very rare combination of all of these pointers to a serial killer.
Cook's first real act of violence was the hit and run of Nell Schneider in August 1958. She lay on the road for 45 minutes and was in a coma for 2 weeks. He committed several more hit and runs, and by the beginning of 1959, he had claimed his first murder victim.
His first murder victim, he actually attempted to murder a number of women before he succeeded in the first one. The first one was Fenna Berkman, who was a part-time model who lived alone in South Perth in a flat not far from where Cook lived, in fact. And he'd broken into her house to steal, he said. And then he bumped a piece of furniture and woke her up, and he just happened to have a diving knife with him that he'd stolen from a break-in at a house earlier in the night, and stabbed her and just walked out of the house.
Less than 12 months later, Cook claimed another victim, well-known socialite Gillian Brewer.
Well, the murder of Gillian Brewer was described by the state pathologist as the worst murder he'd ever seen, and having seen the photographs of it, I'd have to agree.
Cook hit Brewer 13 times with a hatchet, striking her with such force that the handle split. Still not satisfied, Cook stabbed his victim with a pair of sewing scissors he found in her house. Then, replacing the scissors where he found them, he simply walked out, discarding the bloody tomahawk over the back fence. Another man, Darrell Beamish, was charged and convicted with the murder of Gillian Brewer. He was exonerated after serving 15 years. Cook continued his life of crime, prowling, breaking and entering, and running down pedestrians. But he did not commit another murder until the Australia Day Massacre in 1963. The year his mother was shot, Charlie was just 10 years old.
We had a dog, and he was like, Pavlov's dog. If you rang the bell, he couldn't stop him from barking. So he's going off his head. So we went around there, us being kids, to see who's knocking on our door. And there's the police there, just to tell us that she'd been shot.
After being denied the satisfaction of killing Reeves and her boyfriend, Cook continued prowling Perth's affluent suburbs. Entering a house in the suburb of Nedlands, he saw 19-year-old Brian Weir sleeping across the balcony door to escape the heat. Cook shot him in the head. He then wandered the area, ending up in the backyard of a house on Vincent Street in neighboring Dalkeith. Teenager John Sturkey was asleep on the veranda. Cook crept past him and into the house to check the fridge. On his way out, he shot Sturkey in the forehead at close range. Later, he stopped at a house in Louise Street, propping his rifle against a downpipe. Cook rang the front doorbell and hurried back to pick up the gun. As George Walmsley opened the front door, Cook shot him in the forehead. Meanwhile, Charlie's mother and her partner had managed to drive to Fremantle Hospital.
They had my mother there, who's one of the only survivors who's in hospital, and the nursing staff kicked up a stink. They wanted her out of there because they were afraid. Because of this whole episode and it's like little quiet Perth, all of a sudden you've got this mass murder running around, shooting people, knocking on doors. And the way it was done, it made people really on edge. You could really feel it because they're being killed in their own home, knocking on the door for no reason. The day she was shot, my cousin and I, who's 1 year older than me, young Trevor Clegg, he and I decided we're going to sort this bloke out. And what we did was we grabbed a big knife, right, and we get just down short of the Warburton Gardens, they're just short of the Cottesloe Hotel. We're just about there. My cousin Trevor is sitting on the front, falls off the bike and puts his foot straight through the spokes and everything, and he's stuck there, and here we are, crashed in the middle of Cottesloe Beach, and we've got to get ourselves back home. Some stranger takes Trevor to Fremantle Hospital, same place as my mum is. I've got to go home. Remember, I'm 9 or 10. I've got to go home and tell my grandmother, who's just been told earlier on in the day that her daughter's been shot, that Trevor's in hospital too because he fell off the bike.
Reeves insisted that she had seen the shooter that night, but police refused to believe her. Suspicious, they continued to watch her home. The trauma of the event was ongoing.
We were fearful, and we always had this fear that this person was coming back to get the only witness. And we didn't know that our place was being watched by the police. You know, the house was being watched by the police all the time. So we didn't know that. For the next 12 months following that, it was quite unnerving because there was times when the police thought that something was going to happen, you know, for whatever reason. There was a lot of, these sorts of things, a lot of nutters come out of the woodwork and want to be part of it. And so they must have had a warning. And so that they had a detective come to our place, and my mum and the detective sat there, and I saw him there, and he was that concerned that he had his police pistol on the kitchen table.
Reeves took the whole incident in her stride.
And my mother's the toughest person I know, and would be the most honest person I know. If he had got closer with the one arm broken, she would have probably had a crack at him. The press was trying to get a hold of her all the time because, you know, they want a story, you know, and it's that story in Perth. And so they were tracking her down, and we'd gone away to the country, which happened to be Mandurah. It's a suburb of Perth now, but we went away to Mandurah, and we were down there, and the newspaper came down and interviewed her. And she was open about everything and told them. And I think she alluded to that she could recognise him if she saw him again, which is an interesting thing to say, but anyway, that's what she said. Anyway, the next thing, they've got photos of her with a fishing line in the water and with her arm in a plaster, set in a plaster, and she's pretending to fish, you know, for the photo. So that photo was on the front page. It might have been a Saturday's West Australian, and in the same week she goes back to work as a barmaid at the Ocean Beach Hotel and is not intimidated one iota. She's tough.
3 days after the shootings, the inquest into Fina Berkman's death concluded. The court was told that there was no connection between her murder and the perpetrator of the recent shootings.
He was a law enforcement nightmare because his victim selection was totally random. So he would kill people by running them over in stolen cars, he would shoot them, he would stab them, he would strangle them, and it was completely random. So if you do a traditional policing and you look at the victim and you think, well, there's a 90% chance that the perpetrator is known to the victim. No, not in Eric's case.
Exactly 2 weeks after the shootings, Cook struck again. This time, the murder weapon was a stolen car. Rosemary Anderson was walking along Stubbs Terrace on February 9, 1963, when she was spotted by Cook. He ran her down with the vehicle, and she died from her injuries. Her then-fiancé, John Button, was convicted of her murder and eventually exonerated. Just 6 days later, Cook struck again. The victim was 24-year-old social worker Lucy Madrill.
With the Lucy Madrill murder, he had progressed quite rapidly to the point where he, in fact, violated her, her dead body after he'd committed the murder, and dragged her outside her home and across the backyard into the backyard of the house next door.
Lucy shared a house on the busy Thomas Street with another young single woman, teacher Jennifer Hearse. Cook was out roaming the area. He had gone round to the rear to avoid being seen from the busy road. After turning off the power at the mains, he entered through the open back door. Inside, he found Lucy sleeping. He punched her hard in the face and grabbed her throat. Dragging her into the guest room, he strangled her with a cord from a table lamp, then had sex with her corpse. He dragged her body outside, leaving it under the rotary clothesline. Finding an empty whiskey bottle nearby, he used it to violate the corpse and then left it in the crook of her arm. The bottle was taken to Scotland Yard for testing, but results proved unhelpful. Police had still not connected these murders with the Australia Day killings. University student Shirley MacLeod was babysitting for a couple on Wayville Road in the upmarket suburb of Dalkeith on August 10, 1963. Eric Edgar Cook was out skulking. He had just stolen a .22 caliber rifle from a house in nearby Cottesloe.
The final victim was Shirley MacLeod, and that was almost an impulse. It was a stormy night. He was driving around Dalkeith, stopped his car. He actually took a bead on a woman who was walking her dog. He took a bead on her with his rifle, and right at the last second, I think she moved, and another man came into shot, and he stopped and waited till they'd gone, and then he went in through the garage of quite a modern house where the couple had a very young child, a baby, and they'd hired a babysitter while they'd gone out that night, and he just stood at the lounge room door. She was sitting on the couch, studying, listening, had a record spinning on the portable record player, and had a cup of coffee on the table, and he just took a beat and just shot her once between the eyes and left. Very cold, very calm, very calculated, and no remorse.
Can you imagine traditional policing starting there? You'll be looking for ex-boyfriends, you'll be looking for the parents having a grudge with her or something like that. He threw traditional policing out the window. He was a horrendously difficult man to capture.
After Shirley's murder, a squad of 50 detectives worked through Nedlands and Dalkeith, interviewing more than 8,000 residents in what was believed to be the biggest door-to-door canvass in a single area of Australia. Police announced they would be collecting fingerprints from all males between 14 and 60 years of age, and collected 30,000 of them. On August 16th, a couple out for a walk happened on a rifle that appeared to have been hidden in a bush.
Police here were smart, practical people. Most of them had been in the forces during the war. So if you're thinking, it was only 15, 20 years after the Second World War. And they were pretty canny. They'd had 5 years of survival, and they'd worked out lots of good tricks. And how Cook was caught was his rifle was found. He'd hidden it under a bush near the Canning River at Mount Pleasant. And a couple who were picking wildflowers found it and took it to the police, called the police, and they took it to the police station. And the cops very quickly used their military training. They got an identical rifle and they wired it to the bush so it couldn't be taken. And then they got an army tent and hid in the backyard of a house across the road and just watched it 24 hours a day. And 2 weeks after that, on a wet night, Cook came back to get it.
And they came around and told her about how he'd been caught, and it was some really observant people had found his gun, and that was fantastic. And it was just like, whew, they found him. And because that means, that he's not out to get you. Because as a little kid, and all of our family, and we're all, a bit gun shy, obviously, no pun intended, but we're all a little bit, wary because we're living with the only person who can identify this, mass murderer.
When he was arrested, his wife was brought to speak to him, and he said, "I'm for the rope, Sally."
Cook confessed to and was convicted of 8 murders and was sentenced to death. He would be the last man hanged in Western Australia.
There were people being hanged all around the place. When he was operating, he knew what he was in for if he got caught, and he knew he'd been caught. So it didn't deter him. He did 2 good things before he died, and that is he confessed to 2 murders for which 2 other men had been put in prison. And he worked very hard to convince the authorities who didn't want to listen to this because something had gone badly wrong with the trials of these 2 men if they were in jail for a crime they hadn't done. But he tried very hard to convince the courts that he was the perpetrator. And by this stage, he was very, very switched on, and he knew exactly what was needed of him, and everything he said was right. I mean, he even picked the police and the prosecutors up with the mistakes they'd made. He was accused of trying to be, a worse criminal than Ned Kelly, but I don't believe that was his motivation at all. I think he knew that he was for the rope, and before he went, he did want to try to make up for some of the bad things he'd done. He knew right and wrong. He appears to not have been able to stop himself.
At his trial, Cook said, "It wasn't an impulse. It was stronger than an impulse. It was as though I was God. It was like a mantle or like a cloud came over me, and I must use that."
It was very, very hard to find anybody who disagreed with Eric Cook being hanged. Even people who were against the death penalty really just wanted him out of the way.
If I met Eric Edgar Cook, I don't know, mate, what would I say to him, you could... Why did you do it, mate? Was it that bad? You had a lovely wife, you had children, you had everything that people are aspiring to, aspire to. So what, mate? See, people look worse than you in movies. What would I say to him? What'd you do that for? What'd you kill all those poor... What'd you ruin their lives for, mate? You could have said he ruined our life, but, my mother, so tough and so strong, just got on with it. But she could have been the other way around, and she could have been dead.
The Reeves family went back to their normal life as best they could. But City of Perth was changed. People no longer slept on the veranda on hot summer nights. And no one looked at strangers quite the same way again.
The one thing that sticks out to me is that serial killers don't walk around with horns sticking out of their heads. They are just like the normal guy and girl on the street. They are so normal, they mix in with the community. And when they are unmasked, people are absolutely horrified the depth of depravity, what they've gone to. And I've found this in all the cases I've ever dealt with, is that the neighbours, the family, the people that know these people simply cannot believe they've done these terrible things. So unfortunately, I've got to leave you with the thought that your next door neighbour could be a serial killer and you would never know.